So I suppose my references are outdated, but back in the day we'd call this the Britney Spears mic, but she's not really relevant. Does Taylor Swift wear a mic like this? Can I get no? No, they don't use it. The invisible mics, yes. So do what? Joel Osteen mic? Yeah, that's where's Nick? So he'd appreciate that one. You heard it? Yeah, see, it just pops out from behind there. So we are working to get something that's not so like a moon circling another planet, which is because I got a big head, but we're working on it. So I'm excited to be able to preach this morning. We're coming towards the end of Daniel. Next week is Daniel 12. That's the end, and next week I won't be here. I'll be at the revival out in Sanford. But as we're getting going, and this is also one of my favorite chapters. So between chapter 9 and 11, I'm getting my favorites. This is really, in many ways, kind of the culmination. Almost like when you're watching the movie, and all of a sudden everything starts coming together, and it's just one after another, and you're just like trying to keep up with it. That's how this chapter unfolds. But to get us into this, to understand how obscure references can also make sense, like when we talk about, and my wife gets on to me about using too many pronouns and not giving specific references. But in the context of American history, if I was to say, he who announced the emancipation of slaves, that would be Abraham Lincoln. Thank you. So if I talk about he who comes with an army fighting the monarchy and establishing a nation, George Washington. See, we know these kinds of references. And if I was to refer to he who flew the kite discovering electricity, even though that's not true, you knew, like, oh, that's a Franklin reference. So we can talk about many of the things, especially the big events in our nation's history. We don't need to name names. We can just give a little bit of detail, and immediately we're going to know who we're talking about. Now, we do that because we're able to look back. And if I was to give you a string of references of American history, not using any names, not using any places, but just basic directions, you would be able to say, oh, that's this, that's this, that's this. Like you, even if I just use alternative names like the War of Northern Aggression. I knew some of you would appreciate that. So the War of Northern Aggression would be the Civil War. Yeah, that's how, well, kind of like when I talk about the Great War, World War I, because that's how it was referenced before there was the sequel that came later. So we're able to look back, and we can place these kinds of things. And sometimes when you look back at history, we wonder why certain things happen, but then we realize how that changed things to get us to where we are. So, for example, people will talk about referencing World War II, and they look at the Holocaust, and they look at the Jewish nation and the Jewish people. It wasn't really a nation. It wasn't a nation then. It was just the Jewish people, what they went through. And people would ask, why would God let anyone go through this kind of thing? And I said, the interesting thing about World War II and what Hitler did was that for the first time, really, in world history, the world was not anti-Semitic. They were not against the Jews. There was great compassion. And that's what led to the establishing of the State of Israel. And that dramatically impacts even things today. Like, again, history was always different from that, but the whole idea that this group of people would survive without a national identity for almost 2,000 years and then be able to get their nation back, it's unheard of. But you look at some of the extreme circumstances that went on, and when we start talking about some of these national and international things that occurred, they're kind of wild. When we come and we look at the book of Daniel, Daniel has gone through some wild things, gone through the Babylonian captivity. Nebuchadnezzar came in, took a host captive. Jerusalem is flattened. It changed everything, and most of the people now, a generation later, they're asking, what's going to happen? What's going to come of all this? And Daniel has shown how to live in a land that is not their own and how to live underneath an authority that's not godly. He's demonstrated it, but in the prophecies that come, he's letting Israel know, he's like, oh, things are about to get shaken up. Things are about to change. And in Daniel 11 is really the payoff of what he's been talking about. Because in Daniel 10, he mentions that the man Gabriel shows up and he's like, I want to tell you what's going to happen. And really, when you look at Daniel 10, he doesn't reveal a whole lot. There's the issue of Daniel, and he was praying and he was fasting, and Gabriel shows up. He says, hey, I've heard your prayers. I know you've been not eating for 21 days. Sorry, I got hung up. I'm here now. I had to help Michael. We're basically, the nations are raging. He's like, I've been a little busy, but now I'm here, and I'm going to let you know what's going on. But we don't really see in chapter 10 the unfolding. And chapter 11 begins this unfolding. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to read through chapter 11, but we're going to go piece by piece. Because, again, if we read it, you're going to get king of the north, king of the south. There raises this lady and then her son. And none of these references, and I want you to know, in the days of Daniel, it would have been like talking to the American pilgrims that came over, that landed, at Plymouth Rock, hang out there. Those pilgrims, Mayflower. Imagine them hanging out in their colony. Somebody shows up and begins to unfold for them the entire history of America without using specific names, dates, and places. They would have been like, well then, that's interesting. Okay, I guess we'll just have to wait and let our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren sort all this out. Which is exactly what God is doing with Daniel, giving this prophecy that as time goes along, the children of Israel will have this to basically, they're going to be asking, like they're going to look around, they're going to say, this is insane. What is happening? And somebody would be, well, we were told this. That's this thing. We're in the middle of it right now. We're seeing it unfold. So Daniel chapter 11, and actually, for those of you who want, I can make a copy. I got Daniel 11 on one page. I know last time I preached, I had 52 pages. All Daniel 11 and kind of the major history fits on one page. But what goes on, again, Gabriel is going to unfold this. So Daniel 11, verse 1, he says, as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Now this is Gabriel talking about what's happening. And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Now, we're going to read and keep pulling back, because you look at this and you're like, 3 kings, a 4th, one of them is going to punch Greece and make them mad. We know all these names. We know that the kings of Persia, we have them listed. This 4th king that's mentioned here, this is Xerxes. He's far richer than all of them. And literally, Xerxes is the one who goes in. He basically does a campaign against Greece that fails. So you think of it, literally goes, punches Greece, doesn't work, pulls back, and he's like, well, that didn't work so well. But what happened was, the Grecians didn't forget, and a little man named Alexander, who would later be called the Great, comes along and he will exact his revenge, and that's what brings the Persian Empire down. So here we're getting just a snapshot of about 140 years, even more than that, 200 years of history right here. We're being told these kings will rise up. One of them goes against the kingdom of Greece. He's going to stir them up. Verse 4, or verse 3. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion, and do as he wills. That's Alexander the Great. This is what we've been told in these various prophecies. We're being warned about this cheetah that will run through and basically take over the earth. We've been told this guy, Alexander the Great, he's coming, And he doesn't do his thing until 336 AD. We're in the 500s of BC. We're in the 500s BC right now. We're getting like 200 years in the future. So again, this would be the equivalent of maybe right before the American Revolution gets going. You know, you imagine like Washington hanging out there, Jefferson, Franklin, all these guys, like what is going to happen? And somebody's giving them a vision of what would happen in 1970s, 1980s America. Maybe it wouldn't be as far-fetched to say if the American forefathers are sitting around and somebody says, the great king of Russia will fall and the wall will come tumbling down. Which was? Berlin Wall. Yeah, I mean, because that was all Russia splitting Berlin, doing that, the communists, the Cold War, all those things. 1989, right? Got the date right? That was Reagan who said, tear down that wall, and just, it was almost this weird thing, because when that eventually happened, people were just kind of shocked. They're like, wait, it's actually coming down. And I mean, that was a game changer. That was a huge game changer. But imagine trying to explain that to Washington and Franklin and Jefferson. The Berlin, what wall in Berlin? Probably some of them like, what does Berlin have to do with us? We're all the way over here. They had no way of really seeing this. Daniel is being told these things, and what gets me so excited is that the level of detail that's laid out here, God is unfolding his plans because he's not just giving them historical data. Okay, I'm going to have to explain some of these things because we don't know world history. Okay, I know do we have anybody who enjoys, Marion's walking out. I know you. I've already got that. Anyone else other than Marion enjoy history and those kinds of things? Few hands? Okay. So I like this not because it's just simple data, but it's the unfolding of God's plan. That sometimes we look and most people like, well, all of a sudden Alexander comes up and like no one saw that coming, and I was like, God literally in his word said, this is what's going to happen, and you can check it off the list. Alexander the Great goes, verse 4, and as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken, and divided towards the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others beside these. I mean, that's exactly, looking back, that's what happened with Alexander the Great. He goes out, he dies in Babylon on his way home, and his kingdom is divided into four regions. There's Greece and Macedonia, the European group, Thrace and Asia Minor, which is Turkey, northern Syria, Mesopotamia, and the Middle East, southern Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Israel, and Africa area. And it's divided among his generals, not his children. That's the whole point. Like this is kind of unusual how this happens. This is not how anyone would think a kingdom would even be divided or otherwise organized, and God's letting us know that's what's going to happen. So looking back, we're like, exactly, that's what went on. Verse 5, then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Now again, you look at this, and you're like, king of the south, he's going to be a prince, but one after is going to be stronger. Again, not using names. Looking back, we know who these people are. The king of the south was given to his general Ptolemy, and it was the Ptolemies who ruled in the southern region. They ruled Egypt. Most of you might know the name Cleopatra. Cleopatra was of the line of the Ptolemies. She wasn't so much Egyptian-born. She was more Grecian than anything else. She was of this line, and Cleopatra is actually the last of the Ptolemies to rule before Rome came in, and she punched Rome, and Rome said, I'll show you. So that tends to be what happens in world history. Like if we talk about the time America got punched, that would be, what's that? I'm going back a little further. Pearl Harbor. That's how I've often described World War II, because we were trying to be neutral. We're like, we don't want to get involved. Japan comes in, punches us, and we're like, all right, we're in the fight now. Like this is the thing that we see happening over and over. So this king of the south, the Ptolemies, he establishes his dynasty, and this is going to happen again, 300s BC. It's going to carry all the way to about 30 BC when Rome finally comes in. And one of his princes, this is Seleucus I. He took over Babylon, gradually took over the area. Ptolemy became strong because of Seleucus, but Seleucus became stronger. Verse 6, after some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughters of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up in her attendance, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. And again, this is one of those verses. This is why I began. You're looking at this, you're like, I have no reference, because we don't know the history. This alliance was between Antiochus II of the Seleucians, Ptolemy II, and what happens is they have Ptolemy has this daughter named Berenice who stays in Antioch, and she basically is trying to bring these two warring kingdoms together. And what happens is eventually on the other side, Laodice, which we get Laodicea, has Berenice's infant son killed. This is the kind of thing, like her arm, her power is all ruined. We can attach names. We know dates. We're like, it would be the same thing again if I start walking through with American history, or even saying things like, if we were to say in terms of American history, the day the twins fell, that kind of obscure for prior to 2001 would have been entire, like, what? Like, what are we talking about? But now afterwards we're like, oh, that could only mean one thing. So verse 7, and from a branch, from her roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images, their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So again, you look at this and you're like, what is happening? The key for Israel at this point is we're moving towards a certain thing. We're trying to reach a certain moment. And we're being told these kinds of things are happening that's going to lead to this. Kind of like, why did Alexander the Great have it so against the Persians? That was Artaxerxes 140 years prior to him. That was Xerxes and what he did. So we're examining this, and Israel is not at this, they're not just passively observing these things happen in history, because the king of the south and the king of the north, you know where they do their fighting? In Israel. They don't fight in their lands. Israel is a battleground often for these armies, and Israel's not involved. And that, to put it on a minor scale, let's say you've got two neighbors on either side of you, and they're all the time feuding, but they're always ending up in your yard causing a mess. It's always your house that's sort of like in the crossfire. This is what's going on with Israel during this time. Why is it these armies keep destroying our fields? They're taking our children. They're burning our houses. They're causing all of this pillage when we're not even the targets. They're just the bystanders as this is happening. God is telling them, I've got something I'm doing. And he's letting them know when these things are happening, God's trying to tell Israel, I'm well aware of what's happening. God has not forgotten Israel, and I think, like I said, in our days, we look and we see the corruption, we see the fighting, we see the wars. We see even in the church today. I was, last night, a friend of mine posted about a church in Nashville, and this church, they offer classes on the progressive Christianity, and their whole thing is that the Bible is not inspired Word of God. It was written a part of culture, and they even had recently hosted this little concert by the artist known as Flamey Grant. That's a person, in case you didn't know. Okay. It was a cross-dresser known as, because Amy Grant, back in the day, Christian singer. Some of you have no idea. Amy Grant, big Christian. I bet you would hear songs and you're like, oh, that's Amy Grant. Well, this is Flamey Grant. And this church is just all in favor, all excited. And I look at this, and this dude has this massive podcast. You see the massive following, and I'm like, Lord, this is just one church. This is just one thing going on. Lord, where are you? Is part of it. Like God is, when you read their statement of faith, or whatever you want to call that, even when I showed it to Stacy, she's like, this is dangerous. God will not be mocked. God will not stand for this, and he won't. But as this is happening and we're watching it, God is not ignorant, and he's also not passive. It's not that he looks and he doesn't care. His plan is unfolding. And this is why even in our day today, we can look at it, we can look and just see the crazy stuff that went on then, and we can know this is God's story unfolding. So again, as we're told, this lady Berenice, her branch from her roots, Ptolemy the third is her brother. He becomes king after his father, and this is the war, the third Syrian war, as historians call it. This is a major throwdown. Verse 10, his son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. This is Daniel being told, your front lawn is where this fight's going to keep happening. Be aware of this. So the Seleucians and Ptolemies are going at it constantly. Verse 11, then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. And he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. This is referencing Ptolemy the fourth, who attacks Antiochus the third at the Battle of Gaza, 50 miles west by southwest of Jerusalem. So this is again, you just, maybe you guys don't know what this is like. I grew up in Memphis. So in Memphis, to have people begin all of a sudden fighting in your front yard, that's not kind of unusual. And actually, some of my friends that we went to the church, they owned a duplex together. I would go out to their house on Friday nights. We'd pop popcorn. This is terrible. I'm going to admit it, though. We'd pop popcorn because across the street was a drug house, and the bust was always Friday night. And we would sit there, and the people, they're in handcuffs. We're like, hey, Jerry, hey, it's just, we're just watching. This is what went on in the communities that we were a part of. This is just what we saw. It's what we were used to. So for Israel, just a mere 50 miles outside of their capital, this major war goes down. Antiochus III lost 17,000 men that day. That's a lot of bodies. Antiochus, the king of the north, lost 17,000. Ptolemy the fourth only lost 2,000. That's a massive victory. So again, when you think about military, you lost 2,000, they lost 17, that was a major hit. So Ptolemy regains Palestine, but he didn't press his advantage because he was a hedonist. He preferred instead, he's like, I don't want to run, that's a lot of work. And basically he was known for giving himself to a life of abandonment. His heart was exalted, even though he didn't really prevail. He just kind of hung out, and he ends up making a truce when he could have eradicated his enemy, but he was lazy. And so it's now you still got two major powers. 13. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first. And after some years he shall come on with a great many and abundant supplies. This is, again, Antiochus raising a multitude 15 years later. So, again, if he lost 17,000 the first time, that's how many he lost. You try to picture in your head how many people he brought into this area, right into Jerusalem's front yard to fight his enemy. So what happens? Ptolemy, he's a glutton. He ends up dying. His son, Ptolemy V, is only 5 years old when he becomes king. Okay? So that's why part of the reason the south then loses this power. Israel is now back in the hands of the Seleucians. Back and forth, back and forth. 14. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. The violent ones, he's letting them know, the people themselves, these are Jews who aided Antiochus. They're like, well, we see where the power is right now. Let's join in. Let's make this happen. This vision is the prophecy of Daniel. And this is what they end up doing is they end up like, let's help Antiochus. He seems to be the big dog on the block, so let's join him. But it completely backfires. And it will be the Antiochuses that are absolutely horrible to Israel. Verse 15. The king of the north shall come and throw up siege work and take a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. Well, this is where eventually the Ptolemies are pushed out. This is where, again, the king of the north, the Antiochians, they're the ones who really push forward. 16. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills. None shall stand before him. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. So this is where Antiochus III becomes master of Palestine, which sets the stage for Antiochus IV, which I know you guys are like Antiochians, Seleucians, Ptolemies. Antiochus IV, known as Epiphanes, also known as the abomination that causes desolation. When Israel's looking at their history, they think, how in the world did we get to the place where this monster is in charge of Israel and so desecrates the temple? Just basically, how did we reach this point? Within these last 15 verses, Gabriel tells Daniel, here's how it's going to happen. Here's how these forces back and forth, back and forth. To compare it again with the things we're familiar with. Again, most of us, we remember the Civil War, and we remember the history of slavery in America. There was a bill that was promoted and voted on that would have, if it passed, would have tapered off and eventually ended slavery just through legislation over time. And it failed by one vote. One legislator changed at the last, voted against it. That was the key deciding vote, which is why slavery remained legal, which is why it eventually led to the Civil War. Or at least the slavery portion would have been eliminated just like it was in Britain, just through the legislation. Just over time, everything would have been phased out. American history would have been quite different if that had gone down. One little deciding factor, and many people we don't even remember, it was Jefferson who penned that legislation. Missed by one vote. So when we look, again, and we see these kinds of things, and they look and they say, how did Antiochus IV, how did this happen? And you look at the history, well, you remember how we sort of aided them and we sort of set all this up? Verse 17, he shall set his face to come with strength of the whole kingdom. He shall bring terms of agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughters of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage. Now, one of the things Antiochus is worried about is this growing force called Rome. And they're sort of watching it. And even the Ptolemies, Cleopatra the First, she's watching it, and they're sort of worried, and they're trying to get in good with Rome. Here's some of the things that are happening. Verse 18, afterwards he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face towards the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall, and shall not be found. This is Antiochus III continuing his stuff. This is the father of Epiphanes. And basically, he's trying to reconstruct the empire that Alexander the Great had. And it says, he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Literally, as he's going out to gain territory, he ends up getting killed by an angry mob and is just gone. And but that's what it said. He stumbled, he fell, and all of a sudden, that's just not what you would expect to have happen. And now he's off the stage. Verse 20. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So this is one guy who replaces Antiochus III just for a little bit. He oppresses the people through taxation. And if we read the apocryphal books, the book of Maccabees records the history of Israel. It talks about this guy and the things that went on. So it's not just world history. Even the Jewish history talks about these kinds of things. And this guy ends up dying mysteriously. Most people think, his son had a lot to do with it, Epiphanes. Verse 21, and in his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Antiochus IV, bloodthirsty, sacrilegious, cruel. He was Machiavelli before Machiavelli was on the scene. Some of you know that name. He got it done. And verse 22, armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. In other words, the high priest, he talks about the murder of the high priest. This is the power this guy has. He can just go in and murder the high priest of Israel. Verse 23, and from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully and shall become strong with a small people. So this is where, again, we're almost seeing a microcosm of the Antichrist to come. That's part of the reason God is doing this. God, in history, he loves to do things and set up these patterns and say, see, this is the fulfillment. When Israel was in Egypt, and God called his children out of Egypt. This is why Jesus, when he goes down into Egypt, he says, see, I have called out of Egypt my son. We've seen this before, but now I will show you a greater fulfillment than was before. So in the same way with Antiochus IV, we have one who deals with Israel deceitfully, making covenants, breaking them. And what we see in this microcosm here, there is one to come, this Antichrist, who will be even greater, that it will be clearly something we have seen before, but now is a fulfillment. Now we're seeing it in a different way. Verse 24, without warning, he shall come to the richest part of the province, and shall do multiple places. And he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. This guy, again, he was the Machiavelli before Machiavelli. In some ways, he was the Hitler before Hitler. Most of the time in the Jewish people, you want to name the bad guys. Hitler's one of them. Back in their day, Antiochus, he gets mad one time and basically just slaughters 10,000 Jewish people just because he's having a bad day. I don't know what you do when you have a bad day, but my thought is I'm not going to go out and slaughter 10,000 of my neighbors. But this was this guy. He's maybe I feel better if I, just slaughter all these people. part of us, we have to think, what kind of human being are you that treats others this way? Well, he was monstrous. This is why the Jews are like, Lord, how did we get to this point? But wait, there's more. 25. And he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army. There we go again. The king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand. For plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away. Many shall fall down slain. This is Ptolemy the sixth. He's still a youth, and he uses treachery. So what happens? Antiochus basically shows mercy to Ptolemy's troop. This treachery is devised, basically gets the kind of people who are going to get in and kill Ptolemy. Again, it's extremely Machiavellian. History tells the story. It happens just like this. 27. As for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. Here's Gabriel imagine talking to Daniel, and Daniel's sitting there. Maybe, we're Daniel. We got Gabriel in front of us. Here's Daniel writing down these things. He's like, okay, yep, got it. I have no idea. So put yourself back when you were in history class or maybe math class. This happened to me in a couple of my math classes where I'm taking notes, what's on the board. I'm like, I am writing this down, but I do not know what's going on. And the teacher's like, and now we have the solution. Oh, I got the equal sign. That's a solution. That's what follows after the equal sign. I'm writing this stuff down because I am not tracking with what's going on. Here is Daniel. He doesn't know who these people are. None of this has happened yet. But here's Gabriel saying, all this is going to happen, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. So even as Daniel's writing all this down, he knows this is not the results of ping pong balls in a dryer, the image of chaos. This is orderly. This is God's ordering of these events. And Gabriel's just reminding him, this has to happen. And what Antiochus IV is doing, he's fulfilling everything on schedule. Now, I don't know if in the case of the Jews who would be reading this, this is bad stuff. And it's scheduled. And then you also have those who are living through it. And they're reading, they're like, we're not even to the worst part yet. We've got this, so I know what's going on. What else could happen? 28. He shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. And he shall work his will and return to his own land. The Maccabees talk about the atrocities, the murders. This all is recorded. Antiochus wanted to fully capture Egypt, and what happened is he couldn't do it, and this is what would put him in a bad mood. He goes to try to take Egypt, doesn't work. On his way, as he's bebopping back to his palace, he comes through Israel. Well, let's just kill several thousand Jews. Maybe that'll make me feel better. And they went through this. You just imagine every time he's going to war, you just imagine what's going to happen when he comes back. What kind of mood is he going to be in? Verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. For the ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, shall turn back and be enraged, and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. This is part of God's plan. The ships of Kittim, these are the Romans. It has to do with a city. The Roman emissary is a part of this. We're being told again. Most of us, we're even when you hear Rome, most of us are familiar with that. as we shared, I think Nick brought it up one sermon about those who think about the Roman Empire, like how men, or truly men, think about the Roman Empire every day, that kind of thing, the fall of Rome and the glories of Rome and those things. Here's Rome coming on the scene. And now, this is hugely important. Think of the Jews during the days of Jesus. Why are we under this Roman rule? Daniel 11 is showing why Rome got so situated in this area. It's backwater for Rome. Why are they messing with it? There's huge reasons for this, huge historical, political reasons. Verse 31, forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Daniel is being told about something that happens in December 167 BC. Here's Daniel in the 500s listening to this. The warning given to Israel, those who remember God, those who know God will know what's happening. They will see it. They will not buy into the flatteries. They will not, get caught up in the field goodies that Antiochus is trying to do in order to get his way. They'll see it. And this is why when I look at the church age today, and I see almost kind of what he's mentioning, those who are unfaithful to the covenant. I look at the churches today that have literally abandoned the Bible and have literally, what was it? It was when I was in D.C., it was the pastor who's at the church I was at. He's a friend of mine, and he was talking about a lady who had come and their family had joined, and they were visiting a local church in D.C., and the pastor stood up and he's like, I'm just going to let you know, we don't really need this anymore. From a Christian church, a pastor waving the Bible around, as I'm very pastoresque with my Britney Spears mic, waving this, talking about it, but instead of we need to focus here, he basically says, we don't need it. I look at this, and almost as the teens and I on Wednesday nights are going through Ecclesiastes, Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. What comes around has been before, and it will come again. Israel is being told this is what will happen. And the people there, I just have to imagine, weren't there people there when this went down, and they read these verses, and they're like, oh, he's going to set up this abomination. And what Antioch, he's doing it, he's flattering, people are, and there might have been those in Israel who are like, do you guys not see what's happening? And the answer for many who are there is, the answer is no. They were not seeing. It's just like as Isaiah would prophesy, they would have ears, but they would not hear. They have eyes, but they do not see. Like Daniel is straight up warning them, you're about to pick sides. And for some people, they were so worldly, they're going through this, and people are like, look. They wouldn't have had a Bible. They pull out the scroll, so they pull out the Daniel scroll. They're like, it's right here, guys. This is you. And they would have been like, maybe most Baptists today, nah, that can't be. This is the way it should work. This is what makes sense. We have to do it this way. And it's like, no, you don't. A statue of Zeus was erected in the Jewish temple at the altar of the Lord, where the mercy seat, the seat where the blood of the lamb was supposed to be sprinkled on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. They have some sort of representation of Zeus plopped right there. Verse 33. and the wise among the people shall make many understand. Though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. A brief spiritual revival that ended with tens of thousands dying by execution. Tens of thousands who come along and say, this is what God would have us do. And Antiochus says, we're going to put a stop to this real fast. Verse 34, when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble. So in other words, some of the people that were calling for reform are now joining, so that they may be refined, purified, made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. In other words, the appointed time that God has to really cleanse Israel hadn't happened yet. Okay, this is only precursor. Verse 36. And the king shall do as he wills, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. Now this is not Herod. This is not in the time of Jesus. This is still dealing with this king here. Verse 37. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the ones beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other gods, for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortress instead of these, a God whom his fathers did not know. He shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. Now what we're seeing is this king, this shift. It's setting up for one who is going to come, who's going to do far worse. Verse 39. He shall deal with the strongest fortress with the help of foreign gods. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. There seems to be this shift at this point, because we're like, wait a minute. When did this happen? And the answer is, I would maintain, it hasn't yet. There's still one to come who's going to carry what happened here to its fulfillment. Because I'll give you a hint. Gabriel keeps saying the appointed time hasn't come yet. We finished the book of Daniel, and that appointed time hasn't really come yet. We're waiting for that fulfillment. Verse 40. And at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen and many ships. And he shall come into countries and shall overflow and pass through. Now, what we're seeing is we're like, wait a minute, these guys are going to come and this mighty army, we're looking at something similar to the Battle of Armageddon. Which Armageddon, most people. So if you don't remember anything else, because I know we've gone through a lot of history, and you've got Ptolemies, Seleucians, and Antiochians running around your head. The Battle of Armageddon is not the battle at the end of the world. It's literally the Battle of Megiddo, a place. This happens. This is not. We think, oh, Armageddon is the end of the world. No, that's popular. That's the stuff Bruce Willis teaches us. Okay, Armageddon. Some of you, at least maybe. Okay. Some of you now have homework. Whenever I give a movie reference and you don't know, you have to go watch it. So when the Battle of Armageddon takes place, it's a massive battle. The location, and this is the kind of thing that's being described. 41. He shall come into the glorious land. Tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. That's this region we're talking about. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver, and the precious things of Egypt, and of the Libyans, and of the Cushites shall follow his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. He shall pitch his Palatine tents between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. In other words, he will set up his tents in Jerusalem, and there'll be no one eventually to help him. We get this clear historical progression. Except for, when we're looking at it, except for verse 35, up until verse 35, clear historical progression. We've got this shift, this king who shall do as he wills. We're seeing this blending that what I would maintain, Gabriel is telling Daniel, I have set up a plan to cleanse the people of Israel, because Daniel is still in captivity. The people have not returned yet, not in whole, and the question is, what's going to happen to Israel? Israel is under foreign control or dominated and always threatened by foreign nations in its entire existence, as what we'll see in the biblical history, and I would even maintain that's what we see today. And what Daniel is being told, this is going to continue. This kind of thing is going to happen. There's going to be battlegrounds, but what's going to happen is there's going to come eventually this ultimate king who is really going to bring this kind of destruction. Jesus tells us about him in the sermon on the Olivet Discourse, where he talks about this abomination that causes desolation to come. What Daniel could not see as a prophet is from the time of the cutting off of the Messiah, which he predicted in chapter 9, to this last week, this last 7-year period, this church age that's in between. So when he talks about these things, he doesn't see this valley of the church age. These events are put together. So that's why when we read it, and you're reading Daniel, and like we've been doing, and I've only given you the really surface detail, by the way. Okay? I've really been giving you the overview. All of these details, we know their names, we know their children's, we know the locations, we know their dates, but all of a sudden there's this other king, the stuff that's happening. We're like, we can't match that up. It's not Herod. It's not Augustus from Rome. Rome came in and destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. It's not that. That's what we're waiting on, is the end to be fulfilled. And what God is doing is he's bringing his plans for his people to fulfillment. And what I know is even though I did learn I'm about 20% Jewish, my brother, my mom did a little ancestry thing, okay? So I always like to joke, like I'm part Jewish, but I'm not part of the children of Israel. But what I am part of is the bride of Christ. And Jesus tells us at the beginning, he says, he tells us that not even the gates of hell can stand against the church. And when I look sometimes today and I see the falling away that we're seeing in America now, the things that people have been prophesying for a long time, that churches are going to be on decline, that churches aren't going to be able to find pastors, that that Christianity is, in a sense, failing in America, we're seeing that happen, and we're seeing it at a rapid rate. And for some of us, it causes dismay. We're just like, what's really going to happen? What is the face of Fayetteville going to look like when all the churches become hair salons? And the thing is, God's told us this is what has to happen. His word is still going out across the nations. We're seeing it over and over. We know this is happening. Where it pertains to us, because we look at this and we're like, we're not politicians, we're not running for president, we're not, in the government. Who are we? When I read through this, remember those faithful who were able to understand the times and they knew what to do. This is the question for you. Can you read the signs? Can you take a look and can you look at this and you see this battle is raging? And the question for us, are we going to be faithful? Because there were tens of thousands who did what they needed to do, who stood up and said, God is God, you're not, you need to get out. And they died by flame, they died by captivity, they died by the sword. That may or may not happen with us, I don't know. But what I see is I see this larger picture. We sometimes get so focused on, and it's important, Lord, how can I be a good steward of my little bit of money that's left over after I pay my bills? Amen? Some of you are like, what's that? Amen? Some of you are like, Lord, can I know what this is first? And then can you teach me how to use it? Because that's daily life, right? Some of us are wondering sometimes as the plague goes across the church again, like, Lord, how am I going to function with all of these things? And we get very caught up in the normal things of life, which are not small. They're ours to deal with. But I think we miss that larger picture of what it means to be part of God's plan. And what I see from the book of Daniel, when I see all of this happening, I do not forget that each one of us, we're in this story because this timeline covers our age. Are we going to be faithful? Are we going to be the kind of people who can look and see the deception and know how to stand against it? And you think, what could I possibly do? You can be salt and light in a dark and putrid world. That, if nothing else, is what God has called you to. And you won't accomplish that if we put forth our most minimum of effort. And I think this is where we find ourselves in so many churches, and I'm frustrated with some churches right now. I'm working with some churches, dealing with some things, and I'm trying to help people, and I look and I see churches like I am directly connected with. The people like to show up, they do their time in service, and that's it. And I said, that is not faithfulness in Christ. That is that if your only job is to hold this pew down so it doesn't float away, we don't need paperweights in the church. We need people who love God and can display his light in a world that has lost its ever-loving mind, and that God knows it, and he is directing his purposes to the end. And we get to play a part in that as the darkness rages, as the Lord fulfills his plan, he can look at us who stood there shining our little light in the darkness, and when it's all said and done and we stand before Christ, he will look at each one of those that represented those little lights, and he will say, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's the role we play in God's grand scheme. Pray with me. Father, as we try to wrap our mind around so many things in history, we get lost in the details. That we take away from this the idea, the notion. All of these things have been laid out according to your plan. You are the one who did not sit by passively with your heavenly popcorn watching the drama unfold. You have been active since day one. You were not passive in the garden when Adam and Eve faced the serpent and failed. But Lord, you had a plan. You had a plan of redemption. That even through the glory that we face in this life, we experience a glory that even the angels of heaven, even Gabriel himself, will not know what it means to be redeemed. We have redemption through Jesus Christ. We have a gospel that if we just accept by faith that Jesus died for our sins, that he pays the debt we owe, that we know that we have a future that is victorious. Such a small thing for us to believe and receive, that you would come down from heaven to pay the price for those of us who, while we were your enemies, Christ died for us. And that, Father, we can join you. We can be a part of your drama, that for every life we touch, those lives are forever changed. The nations will rage, and as we see, not just from the small picture of what happened in the Middle East so long ago, but just looking at the world stage, we know there's still more craziness to come. But we also know what you call us to is faithfulness here and now. We can rest in faith knowing you're in charge. But Lord, may our hearts be revived for good works, that your church, that has been in many ways scattered to the four winds of this earth, that it will shine in the darkness, and that it will be that witness until the end of days. In Jesus Christ's name we pray.